Good morning, everyone. I want to welcome you to the February 27th, January 27th, 2016 PCTPA meeting held at the Placer County Planning Commission chambers. We will start our meeting with a flag salute. If you'll join me, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. May we have a roll call, please?
Here.
Here. Hesh. Holmes.
Here.
Russlin.
Here.
Trebus. Euler. Wheeler.
Here.
We have a quorum. Thank you. Need approval of minutes for the last meeting.
Like to make motion to approve minutes?
Do I hear a second?
I'll second.
Oh, thank you. It's been moved and seconded to approve the minutes of October 28th, or what, December 9th. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. Agenda review, are there any?
May I abstain?
Oh, abstain.
Thank you.
Abstain as well.
Oh,
Wasn't here.
okay.
I'm not sure how you're going to pass this because I'm going to abstain as well since I wasn't here.
Ooh. What happens if?
So here we are.
Here.
The two.
We've got
Only us.
3 abstentions. How does that work?
Yes, I believe we can put it on next month's agenda. Although I'm advised by our attorney that you can vote on minutes even if you were not in attendance.
Right, and
I will then vote because the person in attendance was here and has agreed with the minutes, so I will approve the minutes.
okay.
I'll do the same.
As will I.
Do over.
So how are we doing? Are we okay then for 3?
Yeah, it was unanimous, I think.
Yeah, don't we have to make the motion again, or now we're good?
All righty. Consent calendar, are there any items? These items are expected to be routine and non-controversial. So are there any items on the agenda on the consent agenda that anyone wants to pull from discussion? Anyone in the audience? Seeing none, I'll ask for a motion to approve.
Motion to approve?
I'll second.
Moved and seconded to approve the consent calendar. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any abstentions? All right, we're now going to adjourn as the Placer County Transportation Planning Agency and convene as the Western Placer Consolidated Transportation Services Agency. We have a consent calendar for that item. Are there anything on the consent item for the Consolidated Transportation Planning Agency that anybody wants to remove for discussion? Anybody in the audience? I'll entertain a motion.
Move for approval?
I'll second it.
It's been moved and seconded to approve the consent calendar for the Consolidated Transportation Planning Agency. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. Any abstentions? Any opposition? Okay. Now we're going to adjourn as the Western Placer Consolidated Transportation Services Agency and convene as the Placer County Transportation Planning Agency. We have a 9:05 timed item. I think, what do you think? Let's go ahead and open up. This is a public, what is this? Public hearing. I'll open up a public hearing for the draft Placer County 2036 Regional Transportation Plan.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and board members. I guess actually before we formally open the public hearing, I just wanted to quickly go through where we stand with the Regional Transportation Plan, why we're doing this, and how we've got here. This is really a culmination of over about 2 years' worth of work and a lot of coordination with the Sacramento Area Council of Governments. So just want to quickly, again, touch on project development, the milestones, and what do we get from developing and adopting this plan. The Regional Transportation Plan is a long-range transportation investment plan. It identifies projects, how we're going to fund projects in Placer County, and identifies the timing for implementation of those projects. As a regional transportation planning agency, this is one of PCTPA's core charters in developing a plan to ensure that there's coordinated transportation planning between each of the cities and the county and other governmental agencies within the county, that we're coordinating those improvements and that we're looking comprehensively at the entire transportation system. Aside from being statutorily required to update this every 5 years, it's a good chance for us to look to see, well, what's happened in the last few years? We're finally coming out of the recession. So the question is, well, what happened with the recession in terms of transportation projects? Do we still need those projects as soon as we used to, or do we actually need different projects now because the development landscape has changed? We also know that there's been several new funding programs that have came and gone, and since the prior plan was developed in 5 years, we've entered into a whole new surface transportation plan. At the federal level, the state funding programs have also changed. So we want to kind of reset our clock for what future revenues we'll see. And probably one of the most important things is in developing the regional transportation plan, we're identifying our own local self-guided projects. Those projects are then incorporated into the larger Sacramento Area Council of Governments Metropolitan Transportation Plan. Their Metropolitan Transportation Plan is federally recognized. And those projects, by incorporation into that plan, are then eligible to receive both federal and state funding. So that's one of the key components of this plan, is developing our own vision for the future of transportation projects in the county and incorporating that into SACOG's MTP SCS. There's been several steps throughout this past 2 years that we've worked on. Beginning back in late 2013, we started off with tribal consultation, working with the United Auburn Indian Tribe in terms of looking at future projects they have, what on their site and the property, and also what are we doing in the county in terms of transportation. We've went out and met with each of your jurisdictions, staff, to identify projects. We've met with other governmental organizations, again, to talk about projects, development trends in the future, as each of your staff sees for their own independent agencies. That transitioned into working with our technical advisory committee made up of public works staff from each of your agencies on developing goals, policies, objectives to guide how we look at future transportation projects and how we look at funding those projects into the future. We then worked with SACOG through the spring of 2014 to look at future funding revenues, again, because there were really two plans in one. We want to make sure that we're on the same page. So we looked at future revenues, funding. We also looked at how the projects fit into the scenario development for the sustainable community strategy that SACOG also does. We came back to the board in September 2014 with a set of revenue estimates and projects that would form the draft revenue and project list for the Metropolitan Transportation Plan as well as our Regional Transportation Plan. SACOG then worked on looking at how do all those projects within the 6-county region, what types of performance benefits do they bring? We all understand right now there's a lot of traffic congestion in our county as well as a large area. So how do these projects help out with the future growth that we're anticipating? They worked on those through June 2015, and then we started working on development of the RTP itself, writing the chapters, and also the accompanying environmental impact report. That environmental impact report and plan was released in November 2015, and this is ending our public review period for these two plans. During this entire time, there's a number of outreach activities where we wanted to find out public input, public sentiment for different transportation projects, funding opportunities, what generally individuals in your communities were wanting to see. That started off with polling back in May 2014. We did actually 3 different public polling that were statistically valid throughout the county to get a sentiment feel for projects and funding. Also, 2 different focus group meetings, a joint public workshop with SACOG in the city of Rockland in October of 2014. Not to mention the numerous meetings that Celia, our executive director, held with chambers of commerce, Rotaries, every other business community group within the county. All this planning really is ground up. This plan is built on local general plans, the transportation projects that are in your circulation elements. Those all feed up into the regional plan, which then feeds into SACOG's 6-county regional plan that, again, is federally recognized, feeds into the state transportation improvement plan and Caltrans planning work that they also do. So it's all ground up. There's really 5 things that come out of the regional transportation plan. Those are the policy guidance, projects, performance benefits and documenting that, demonstration of air quality conformity, and a programmatic environmental impact report. As I mentioned earlier, the policy really guides us. It says what our values are for the county. This is a diverse county in terms of the the high area in the Sierra Nevadas to down here in the Valley floor to our rural communities. So it's balancing all those interests. The projects that come out of the plan are approximately $5.9 billion over the course of the 20 years. There are short-term projects to implement and longer-term projects to address future transportation needs. And we can see by the pie chart here that there's a vast, diverse range of projects that will be funded. And again, continuing on our history of having high quality of pavements and roadways in the county, approximately 43% of that's identified to go towards maintaining what we currently have today. Benefits of the plan, we always ask or get asked, well, there's congestion out there now. We're going to add more people. How do we continue to address congestion? How do we make sure we're not in gridlock? Well, with a suite of projects that are in this plan, we have been able to identify that we'll be able to continue to manage our congestion that we have, make improvements throughout the county, by reducing the amount of VMT that's occurring. This assumes that there are going to be individuals who are more increasing individuals using transit, using other forms of transportation, a better mix of jobs within Placer County that people won't have to drive as far to. So we do identify that we are being able to improve on the current congestion and travel levels into the future.
I just want to add, VMT is vehicle miles of travel.
Sorry about that.
It's okay.
And one of the other important things that come out of this is, without being able to demonstrate that the Sacramento area region can attain federal and state air quality standards, we wouldn't be able to implement many of these projects in here. So by identifying how much essentially air pollution is going to be generated and that we are meeting these targets that are set by the feds, that we can continue on to develop these projects and construct projects within our regions. The environmental document that accompanies this report also identifies what potential impacts there are and how those impacts can be potentially mitigated or lessened as a result. So next steps on this is to go ahead and formally open the public comment period. We'll take any comments that we receive here today. Any comments that I also receive via email or letters will be individually responded to in the final regional transportation plan. So with that, Mr. Chair, I'll turn it back over to you.
Okay, thank you. Any questions for Mr. Hoyt? All right, we will open this public hearing. Anyone from the public wish to address the commission on this item? Seeing none, we'll close the public hearing. And see you back in February, right? Okay, thank you. Now we'll move to item H, the I-80 Auxiliary Lanes Project Draft Environmental Document for action.
Good morning, Vice Chair Holmes and members of the board. We're going to be giving a presentation here on the recently released draft environmental document for the Interstate 80 Auxiliary Lanes Project. And I just want to take a moment here to introduce some of those folks in our audience. Our consultant, Dokken Engineering, has been working very hard to get us to this point. And I want to introduce Liz Diamond, Namat Hosseinian, and Zach Liptak. Also here today is Rod Murphy. Just behind them, our Caltrans project manager, also been working very hard with us to move this project along.
Okay.
Okay, so our project here includes two locations. We have one on eastbound Interstate 80 between State Route 65 and Rockland Road, and then we have a second location on westbound Interstate 80 between Douglas Boulevard and Riverside Avenue. And we have several project partners we've been working with, including Caltrans, Federal Highway Administration, City of Roseville, and City of Rockland, and also Placer County. And we've been utilizing these 5 key goals shown here to develop the project alternatives that we're going to show you today. And we've really been focusing on reducing traffic congestion and improving safety. So for location 1, this is eastbound Interstate 80. Really, the focus here is improving safety, and we have 2 lane drops within 2,000 feet of each other, and then we also have traffic from the Rockland Road off-ramp backing up on the Interstate 80 eastbound. Here's a photo here of the first lane merge where State Route 65 southbound merges with Interstate 80 eastbound. And then just 2,000 feet to the east, we have another lane merge where it goes from 4 lanes down to 3 lanes on eastbound Interstate 80. And then here's a photo of traffic backing up from the Rockland Road eastbound off-ramp onto the Interstate 80 main line. On the location 2, westbound Interstate 80, really the focus here is improving, reducing traffic congestion. As you travel on westbound Interstate 80, it goes from 5 lanes down to 4 lanes at Douglas Boulevard, and then it carries through for 4 lanes all the way to Riverside Avenue. So this is a photo actually looking west from the Douglas Boulevard overcrossing on westbound Interstate 80. And then this is a photo looking towards the east, towards Eureka Road, and traffic's backing up in the evening on westbound Interstate 80 past Lead Hill Boulevard. And then, of course, if we have traffic congestion on Interstate 80, then the meter that's on the on-ramps are then set lower, and traffic starts to back up onto our local streets. And this is Douglas Boulevard, the loop on-ramp, and traffic there is backing up all the way to Sunrise Avenue. This is looking down Douglas Boulevard from the interchange. So we've been working on the environmental document since early in 2014. We had 2 community meetings. The first one we had on May 4th, 2015 in Roseville, and we focused there on the westbound location. And then we had a second community meeting on May 7th, 2015, and we had that in Rockland, and we focused on the eastbound location. And for both of those meetings, we published notice in the local newspapers, and we sent a notice by mail to everyone within 1,000 feet of these 2 locations. So now I'm going to turn it over to Liz Diamond from Dock and Engineering, and she's going to talk about the project alternatives and the results of the draft environmental document.
Thank you.
Thank you, Luke.
Good morning. It's a pleasure to be here today. As Luke mentioned, I'm going to walk you through the different alternatives that we studied. We looked at 3 alternatives from both a detailed design and an environmental consequences perspective. The 3 alternatives is listed here. Alternative 1 suggests a auxiliary lane in both locations to deal with some of those issues that Luke just explained. Alternative 2 would have that same auxiliary lane in location 1 in the eastbound direction, but a 5th through lane in the westbound direction. Alternative 3 looks at the consequences of doing nothing. So 20 years from now, if we haven't done anything, what will the consequences of that be? So let's talk about location 1 first. Again, just to make sure everyone is oriented, we are talking about the eastbound. So we're going to come from Sacramento to Lake Tahoe. We have Highway 65 and Rockland Road. The existing lane configuration as you come from the west and you pass under the State Route 65 overpassing, we have 4 through lanes coming under the overpass. We have an HOV lane on the outside as represented by this designation. As you pass under the overpass, that SR 65 ramp joins the freeway, creating a very short little spot with 5th lane, but then you have that first merge. As the HOV designation or lane discontinues, you have the second merge. At that point, you have 3 lanes passing under the Rockland Road overpass, and to get off onto Rockland Road, you have a permissive off. So you can either keep going or you can get off onto off onto Rockland Road. Now, the 2 alternatives are the same in this direction, so I'm going to talk about them only once and at the same time. What is proposed in Alternative 1 would be to add a 4th lane between the 2 overpasses. That's the definition of an auxiliary lane. So the lane coming on from 65 basically stays the same, but as you continue on in that 4th lane, you don't merge over. That 4th lane will continue on. If you were to stay on it, so if you were to come off this overpass and continue, you would just continue right along and get right off on Rockland Road. You would never have to merge. Now, certainly a lot of people are going to be merging to come this way and merging to come that way, but you have 1 more lane to do it, so it becomes much smoother. You can have more through capacity on your freeway and better safety operation of people starting and stopping, which causes those rear enders or those side swipes. The third lane would continue to have the permissive off to allow you, or optional off. You could continue straight or come off on the off ramp. So there would be 2 off ramps onto Rockland Road. It would then feed into the existing configuration of the interchange. Now, I know Rockland is looking at other improvements someday on that interchange and improvements to the intersection, but these 2 lanes would feed in under this project into the existing intersection. Now, in order to make room for that to happen and not impact China Garden, the frontage road, we would widen the freeway. I'm going to point out just a few features. We have an existing state right-of-way line, which is represented by the fence, and China Garden Road in most locations in the middle of this stretch is higher. So we'd be widening and putting in a retaining wall. The material, the dirt, would be dug out in this area to make room. Now, I want to point out a couple of features that by doing that, what happens. And I would like to talk a little bit about the sound wall that is in that area. So this, again, just to orient you, so when we go to the next photo, you know where we are. We have 65, we have Rockland Road. This is Secret Ravine coming through here, Rustic Hills Drive, and we have an existing sound wall in this location. So as part of our work, we looked at, things like traffic, but we also looked at things like drainage and geology and cultural resources, a number of things I'll talk about in a minute. But one of them is noise. And so we took a good look at the sound wall that is at the current location, and we did a number of measurements out in this area to get a baseline of what noise is out there and then model an existing condition of noise and a future condition of noise. And we looked at the standards of the City of Roseville, City of Rockland, the county, and Caltrans FHWA. There are some federal funds on this project or anticipated, and so we're looking at FHWA requirements too. And in doing that and looking at the noise and looking at what it would take to provide a reduction or a reduction of noise to meet the standards that are set, the levels of threshold that are set by the different communities, we do propose an extension of this sound wall. So the sound wall, these pictures show the existing sound wall looking east towards Rockland Road or west towards 65. So we are proposing this sound wall be extended further along China Garden Road for about 750 feet at a height approximately the same as what is out there. And that is to protect or to reduce the noise to acceptable levels in the area that the noise studies showed it would not be had we not proposed that. As I mentioned in that cross-section slide, the work is done within the existing state right-of-way for essentially all of this project, except where we come off on the ramp. As I mentioned, the project would, built as proposed, would have 2 lanes coming off of the freeway to feed the existing intersection. We have to do a little grading in this area in order to fit it in, if you will. So there is a small 2.5-foot right-of-way transfer proposed between the city and the state to make room for the slope and grading work that's necessary to meet standard. And then we'd give the contract a little room to work there during construction, but that would be a temporary impact. So that pretty much explains location 1, which is the auxiliary lane between 65 and Rockland Road. So now let's talk about location 2, which is the westbound location between Douglas Boulevard and Riverside. Now at this location, we have 2 alternatives, and so I'm going to go through them one at a time compared to the existing condition so that you understand a few of the little details, differences between the 2 alternatives. For a majority of the project, they are the same, but at the interchanges, they are different. So first, let's talk about the existing condition. The existing condition, as Luke mentioned, we have 5 lanes coming from the Atlantic on-ramp. Those lanes, as they proceed down and approach Douglas Boulevard, one is a mandatory off. So you get off at Douglas Boulevard. The 4th lane, you can either get off or keep going. As you keep going, however, you meet the people that are getting on at this loop on-ramp, and then you meet the people that are getting on at the diagonal on-ramp. So you have a lot of merging and a lot of, people trying to get off, people trying to get on, people trying to get over, all going on right in this location, and that creates a lot of the congestion, herky-jerkiness that goes on there. As you is you travel down in the 4th lane and you go over the overcrossing at Kirby and you get off onto Riverside Avenue. This is again an optional off, or you can keep going. As you keep going, however, the loop on-ramp here and the diagonal on-ramp here at Riverside create a new lane. And that auxiliary lane continues on, but it's not an auxiliary lane. It keeps going all the way down to the county line. So in this option, or in this alternative 1, we would look at just an auxiliary lane, similar to what we talked about in the other direction. This would not change. You would still either have to get off or have a choice on that 4th lane to go through or to get off. As you get to Douglas Boulevard, you would have that loop on-ramp and diagonal ramp. Instead of it merging into this 4th lane, it would make a new lane. And so these people would have a little more clear shot, if you will, to come down the freeway, and these people would have a little more clear shot. They wouldn't have to meet each other till they got further down the road. As you get further down the road, that 5th lane would go away and get off on Riverside. So if you are traveling further west, you do have to get over to keep going under Riverside and continue on down, or over Riverside and continue on down. And then you have, these people joining you in that 5th lane. So alternative 1 is the red line, adding a new 5th lane in the area between the interchanges. Alternative 2 is physically in the field the same out here. The differences are here at the interchanges. So let's review. Again, on the existing, the 5th lane gets off, the 4th lane go straight or get off. In alternative 2, that 5th lane would continue. So the 4th lane becomes a through lane only. You would not be able to get off at Douglas Boulevard with 2 lanes. The 5th lane, however, would come through, and these folks that are now joining that 5th lane are joining the 5th lane rather than the 4th lane. So that is adding capacity. Now, folks, right away, they say, we're getting rid of a lane here. We've done counts on that ramp. We've done, I think, conservative that in generous projections of growth for 20 years. A single off-ramp can take the traffic that is projected 20 years from now. So when we look at the choice here, we see existing congestion here and a lot of extra capacity there. So by proposing this 5th through lane, if you look at the overall network analysis, it is of benefit to make this change. So as we move down the auxiliary lane, you'll see the differences here. These folks are either getting off or going straight. In this one, there's a 5th lane continuing on. And it then joins these folks that are getting onto that 5th lane. There are some modifications in this area in order to, provide the necessary separation between ramps and the tapers and the merge lengths. All those geometric things have been looked at. So alternative 2, just to go back, alternative 1 is just the auxiliary lane. Alternative 2 is the 5th through lane. Now, there are a couple features on this project, too, that I want to, location that I want to highlight as well. Similar to the eastbound location, in order to make room for the improvement, we do have to widen the freeway. Here is the existing right-of-way fence. So the widening is occurring within the right-of-way, but we are moving closer to the right-of-way. I'm going to show you some information about this sound wall here in a minute, but I want to point out that we are proposing a standard median and a standard shoulder. You have 5 lanes of traffic out here. You have 200 and some odd thousand cars a day driving on this facility, and those shoulders and medians are really important for the frequency of things that occur out on the freeway. So in order to do that, some physical features need to be dealt with, if you will. So again, just to orient you first, here's Riverside, here's Douglas, here's Kirby Way. We have an overpass here over the freeway. We don't need to lengthen that bridge. We do have to do some tie-back wall work underneath to make room for the new lane, but we think it'll actually fit through there. The Linda Creek Bridge needs to be widened. So Linda Creek, it's the Linda Creek Bridge at Kirby Creek. It's just the way it was named. Here's Kirby Creek. Here's Joanne Lane. This is Kirby Hills Court. I might be off on my designation, but it's Kirby Way or Kirby Lane Court. Anyway, the bridge here would need to be widened. We're going to talk a little bit about that in a minute, a little bit more. We also have an existing sound wall that needs to be relocated. So those sound studies were done in this location, similar to the eastbound location. And the height of the wall is sufficient to mitigate the sound that occurs because of the widening. It's already high enough, but it's too close. So that wall that is existing needs to be removed and then rebuilt further back to make room for the new lane and the full shoulders. It would be extended at its approximate current height to the east, about 120 foot, so it catches the noise a little sooner. It also would be extended to the west. It would go right on over the bridge. It would be built up on the bridge across the widening of Kirby Creek, about 690 feet to the west. In this section, it's 12 feet tall. This is about 10 feet, where this would be about 12 feet. As I mentioned in the cross-section, the work is occurring within existing state right-of-way, except right here at the ramp. As we configure these ramps to fit into a fifth lane rather than a fourth lane, or to allow the merge to occur here a little differently with an auxiliary lane, we do have the addition of an HOV bypass lane on this ramp, and this is scooting a little further to the north, and we have a couple areas where we need a little bit of right-of-way. These are blow-ups of that 2 area. I'm going to start with location number 1 that was on the west side. We do have a property where the house is built very close to the end of the street, and so the separation between the existing wall and the overhang of the house is only about 7.5 feet. So it's pretty close already. We need to move that wall back about 2.5 feet. It can be done. We'd get a temporary easement along the side yard, and we would, of course, have to work with the property owner to secure or buy the right-of-way. But that process would go on during final design, and it would require that wall to get 2.5 feet closer to that property. So it is tight, but it is doable. We also have a vacant lot in the backside anyway here along the ramp. This is that HOV bypass and the through on the ramp, or the metered lane on the ramp. We have a widening here. The grade, this is higher than the adjacent. We have to do some slope work in here in order to have that meet the existing ground. So there's another small acquisition that's required there, and a little extra room to work during construction. Excuse my voice. So as we worked on the design and worked with Caltrans and our partner agencies to come up with the alternatives in terms of their physicality, we also prepared environmental documents to study the various resource areas like noise, water, and cultural resources. We prepared both a CEQA analysis and a NEPA analysis. CEQA would be the California Environmental Quality Act for the state requirements, and then a National Environment Policy Act review for the federal portion, so that if federal funds are used on the project, we meet those requirements too. Caltrans is the delegate for FHWA in this area, so they are very involved, both because it is their facility and because of the FHWA requirements. We released the environmental document on January 11th. Notices were sent to the 1,000-foot area that Luke mentioned before. They've been posted, and Luke's going to go through that in a little more detail here in a minute, but we're in the middle of our 30-day public review, which is why we thought today would be a good day to present it, of course, to your board, get your input as well, and any public comment. Once the circulation period closes on February 11th, we would respond to all the written comments that have come in, or any comments that come in today, and make whatever modifications or additional measures that might result from that, and then move the project forward for consideration of approval and the selection of the alternative. We will need to select between alternative 1 and 2. So these are the areas that the environmental document studied. I'm not going to go through, yay for you, I'm not going to go through all of them. Many of them had results as expected. There are not results that I think weren't going through in detail here today, but all the information, all the technical studies are available online and summarized in the environmental document. There are two areas that are probably a little bit more of note that I want to point out. We have some mitigation measures in all of those areas that we talked about, things like water quality and such, to make sure that there aren't impacts or that we minimize the impacts of the construction. But there are two areas of biological resources and noise that I wanted to point out. The Kirby Creek is a resource where we're concerned about protected species like steelhead, and in certain weather conditions and certain storm flow conditions that could be used for passage by fish. And so as we widen that bridge, we have to be careful to do that in a way that we minimize impact. So we have some measures to allow fish passage. We have consulted with the National Marine Fisheries Service, who has jurisdiction over that issue, and they have concurred with our measures and provided their biological opinions. So we're past that checkbox, if you will, and of course permitting would be required as part of the construction. Noise is the other one. I've talked about that a little bit already, so I'm not going to go into it in great detail, but we are proposing the extensions of the sound walls in order to meet the guidelines that are put forth by the various agencies to minimize noise impacts by projects such as this. So I'm going to turn it back over to Luke now, who's going to talk a little bit about what's ahead.
Thank you.
Just briefly before we turn back over, when we're looking at the alternatives as they relate to westbound at Douglas and talking about the impact of reducing from the two off lanes down to the one, I agree. My experience indicates that there is excess capacity on that when you get off at Douglas headed westbound there. What I'm wondering is, would either of those changes, whether it's alternative 2 or alternative 1, have any impact on what we're trying to accomplish a little further upstream with widening the on-ramp from Eureka onto westbound 80? Because right now that Eureka to westbound 80 is one of our biggest issues that we have in terms of our surface street impacts. And so I just want to make sure that whatever we're flowing onto coming off of Eureka up there, we've got adequate capacity here too.
Well, I'll speak to a little bit. I mean, City of Roseville is leading that effort, but you know, there's sufficient distance between the two interchanges that where that on-ramp would merge in, it would merge into that, basically that fifth lane well before basically Lead Hill, Lead Hill overcrossing.
Yeah, I know that we're working on that, but that from, because you showed the shot of Douglas westbound as it comes over, and yeah, the problems there in terms of the backup. But my experience has been you experience it far more frequently, far more severely at Eureka, the backup associated with getting on the freeway there than you do on the westbound direction there than you do on Douglas.
Right.
That's all. Thank you.
Director Trebus.
Could I ask either a naive or ignorant question on that last graphic that I thought of on the first one, not being familiar with Kirby Way? Those two, the existing and the alternative, to me is showing that Kirby Way is an underpass and then going to an overpass?
An overpass with no on-off.
Yeah, that's just a mistake on the graphic. That black line on the top there should be going over the freeway.
It should be going, okay,
Yeah.
that's,
Good catch
sorry that
for
I
our
wasn't
next
familiar
presentation.
enough with that. Haven't been to
That was a good
Kurt's
question.
office enough.
Good question.
Okay, so I just have 2 more slides here, just talking about what's ahead. We are going to be coming back to the PCTPA board in the next couple of months, and we'll be showing kind of a comparison of the different alternatives, including the no build, for the board to select a preferred alternative. Once we have both state and federal environmental approvals, we'll be able to move into the design phase. So I want to talk a little bit here about funding. If you recall from our June 2015 meeting, the remaining federal earmark savings from the I-80 bottleneck project were moved over to the Interstate 80 State Route 65 Phase 1, the first phase of that interchange. And so for design and construction on this project, it's really going to be dependent on another funding source. likely the local transportation sales tax measure that needs to be approved to go on the ballot and then would have to pass. Right now, alternative one, where we're looking at the auxiliary lane in both locations, that cost estimate is about $16 million. And then by adding a fifth lane at the westbound location, alternative two, that cost is about $18 million. So Caltrans is the lead agency for the environmental document, and so any comments that are submitted need to be submitted to Angela Shepard at Caltrans. We also have comment cards here at this meeting that folks can fill out and submit to us here today. All comments are due by February 11th, and then all the draft environmental document and other supporting documents can be accessed on the project website at PCTPA.net. And so with that, be happy to answer any additional questions from the board or from the public.
Any questions from board members? I see none. Anyone in the public wish to address the agency board on this item? Seeing none, I think we're done in this one. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah.
So the eastbound project going from Highway 65 to Rockland Road, it ends up being 3 lanes right there, and one is the HOV lane. So in this process, which will take several years, is there any way that that HOV lane can be suspended from Highway 65 to Rockland Road? And I know that my colleague here has probably asked that question, but I'm going to ask it again because it is just horrible. And if there's the option for us to fix that, there's got to be a way to change that a little bit.
You're right. Board Member Euler did ask us to look into that, and we spent a good year with Caltrans doing analysis and looking into that further. And what we heard back from Federal Highway Administration and Caltrans is that it would be very difficult to get that approval. And actually, through the analysis, we weren't able to show a really significant benefit, actually, to really force that issue much further. So.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks.
Appreciate it.
Okay. Good thought. Yeah. So, do we need to take action on this or just, yeah, all right, fine. Thank you very much. Thank you for your presentation. Very informative. Now we'll go to item I, the federal legislation program for 2016.
Yes, good morning, Vice Chair Holmes, members of the board. This item is to adopt our federal legislative program for this year and to direct staff and our federal advocates to forward these positions in Washington, D.C. And by way of background, much to, I think, everyone's surprise, the feds, the Congress, and the administration got their act together late last year and actually passed a long-term transportation plan, or Transportation Act, called the Fixing America's Surface Transportation, or the FAST Act. They always have an acronym. That's one of the better ones, I will grant you. This is a 6-year bill. It goes through 2020. It increases the authorizations for funding by about 3% annually, which is terrific. It also, for the first time, has a passenger rail title in it, which is something unique. On the other hand, it's the one area of the bill that doesn't have identified funding, so it has to be authorized on an annual basis. And even more than passing the FAST Act, they also passed an appropriations bill for 2016. So basically authorizing the money to be spent through the FAST Act. So that's the good news. The less than good news, I wouldn't exactly call it bad news, is they did not fund the rail title. So the opportunity that we might have had for the third track project through that, we were very excited about that opportunity, is not there for this year. And the other part of it is that while this is a 6-year bill, it's a 5-year bill, but they're using 6 years worth of funding to fund it. So when it comes to year 6, there will be no money. So that's something that we have to recognize is looming in the distance. And Congress is going to need to grapple with that before 2020 otherwise the faucet is going to be turned off, and that would be tragic at best. So anyway, with this passage, provides some opportunities for us in terms of our federal legislative program. And what I've recommended to the board is really going along the lines of what we've done in the past, which is very action-oriented as opposed to getting deep into policy. Certainly, in terms of policy, we would like them to fund the passenger rail title so that we would have the opportunity for funding of the third track project. Our priority projects would remain the same as they have for the last number of years, which would be funding for the 8065 interchange, for the Placer Parkway, as well as the third track. We're also at a point where some of the discretionary programs really apply to some of our projects in a way that they haven't in the past. For example, the Tiger Grant program, which has been in effect for a number of years, but the application process is really onerous, and it's very, very competitive. I'm thinking there's $500 million available nationally. But I think we're in a position where I would recommend to the board that we pursue this now because of a couple of things. First off, because this program has been in place for a number of years, a lot of the low-hanging fruit, as it were, have been plucked. So a lot of those projects are sort of out of the way, as well as the 8065 interchange. Now that we're in the draft environmental process and should be finalized later this year, we're really at a point where it is much more attractive to the feds. They want to fund the last dollar of a construction project, essentially. They want to go to a ribbon cutting like we all do. And with the first phase 1A of the interchange moving forward and potentially being able to go to construction in 2017, I think our timing is right. So what I would recommend is that as part of our legislative program, we pursue that. And with the board's approval, I would also then put some money into our final budget amendment for this year to get some assistance in putting together that. It's a tough application and very technical. We've got a lot of data that has come through that environmental document, but we're still going to need some help to put the whole thing together. So also there is a program called the Nationally Significant Freight and Highway Projects Program. And like with all federal bills, you know, they put out these ideas, but the devil's in the details, and it's going to take a while for Department of Transportation to figure out, you know, what the criteria are and the application process and all the details. But I think so far in the general description of this program, I think we've got really a number of projects that might be eligible for that. So certainly trying to influence what rules there are coming down to benefit our projects, as well as pursue funding for the 8065 interchange, for the Placer Parkway, for the third track project. I think those have some legs there, and we'll have to see which and sort of how to put that together for our best benefit. And then finally, as we're moving forward on looking at the possibility of a transportation sales tax, there's a program called the Transportation Infrastructure Finance and Innovation Act, or TIFIA, that is a financing mechanism that we haven't pursued in the past because you have to pay these back. And we haven't had the revenue to pay them back. With this prospect of having revenue, this is something we need to take a look at if it is a better deal than, say, bonding for a transportation sales tax. So this is something that I would recommend that as we're back in Washington, we talk to the folks that do the TIFIA program, talk about our projects, find out what they have available that would suit our needs. Then as part of our program, as always, Their member jurisdictions may have their own local projects that they want our support for. I have not received anything from the jurisdictions on that stead, but that's something that we have a long-standing policy of supporting our member jurisdictions. And then finally, the recommendation is to pursue these recommendations back in DC. We are currently working with SACOG on doing a joint trip ahead of Cap to Cap at the end of February, because this year our chair, Susan Rohan, is also the chair of SACOG. So by doing this jointly, we save half the money.
Yeah.
We share the cost with SACOG. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Any questions for Celia? Seeing none, anyone in the audience wish to? Seeing, sounds like a good idea. Shall we take action on this? Huh?
Second.
It's been moved and second to approve item I, the federal legislative program for 2016. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? The motion is passed. We'll now move to item J, the executive director's report.
Yes, I have a rather robust executive director's report, and it's mostly all good news, but I'll start with the bad news. And that is that you may have seen in the paper or on television about the need for the California Transportation Commission to remove almost $800 million out of the State Transportation Improvement Program, which is tragic. But I will also say that as you're seeing that, I would say we are the least affected of any county in the state. Here's why. We've spent our money. Essentially, because of the advance of funding that we did for the Lincoln Bypass back more than 10 years ago, we still owe the STIP, the State Transportation Improvement Program, we still owe about $40 million. So the nice thing, and this is money we don't pay interest on it, we just don't get this money, and because we've already spent it. So the shortfall that is being faced, a lot of counties are going to have to remove projects from their programming or extend them out further that, we're driving on the Lincoln Bypass now. So I don't want to minimize how bad a situation it is at the state, but I think we, as I say, our impact is minimized. Now, there is $3 million still remaining in there for the third track project that may be affected. It may be pushed out. I will say that, the STIP is a very convoluted series of programs, but there is a sub-program within that the third track is in called the Public Transportation Account, and that actually is less impacted, and there's a different sort of source of funds for that where the third track project would be funded from. So I'm not convinced we'll actually even have to delay that project, let alone deprogram it. So, things need to be considered yet, but that's the outlook at this point. So there's going to be a lot more discussion, certainly on a statewide stage, about transportation funding and whether the legislature actually puts something together and moves forward on it. They did try through the special extraordinary session, which apparently is still going on. I hadn't really realized. And there is a proposal that by Assembly Transportation Committee Chair Frazier that would be a package of funding for transportation, primarily for road maintenance and new revenues and such. And I'll bring more information on that to you at your next board meeting. But one of the things I wanted to note about this proposal that I think is really exciting is that 5% of the money for under one of the pots would go to counties that pass counties that do not have a transportation sales tax that pass one after July of 2016. As we were doing some calculation amongst we're called the aspiring counties, those that don't have a transportation sales tax that are looking into them, we believe that to be about $250 million a year, and there are probably only 5 to 7 counties that would fit that criteria. So that could be a huge boost in the match that we would receive should we be successful in placing a measure on the ballot and having that pass. So there's some interesting things in play at the state, and we'll be talking more about that at next board meeting. So that actually was the bad news.
Okay.
Second item of interest, talking about the transportation sales tax and our outreach effort on that, we are working with the United Auburn Indian community. They have indicated their interest in providing us a grant to assist us in outreach, and that is going to be considered by their tribal council next week. If that's the case, we're looking at up to $150,000 that we can use for outreach to try and inform the public about some of the issues with transportation and some of the tough decisions that are facing us. If that does come through, that would also require a budget amendment. We would have to, like most grants, we would have to front the money and get repaid. So that would require a budget amendment, which I would bring forward to the board in our final amendment. So I think that's good news. Third item is that working with the folks at Clipper Creek, which is a local firm that manufactures electric vehicle charging stations, they have agreed to donate a charging station to the agency, which we would install in our parking lot for the public, and using some of our congestion mitigation and air quality grant funds for our transportation demand management program. Actually, it's our congestion management program. We would fund the electricity for that, and so that would be available to the public. So I'm very excited about that donation, and so that may be a ribbon cutting in your future. And then finally, we have been working on the 8065 interchange. As you know, the draft environmental document is moving forward, and now we're working with the regulatory agencies on some of the permitting issues, and specifically we've been working with the Fish and Wildlife Service, and they had indicated, because we are just touching the Highland Reserve mitigation area, I think that, and Luke might preserve. Want to make sure I have my terminology. They had indicated that they expected a 10-to-1 ratio in mitigation, which is unbelievable. It's so far beyond what one would expect. But the good news is that we were able to, working with our team, respond to that, provide justification, and they have actually agreed to a 4-to-1 mitigation ratio, a much more reasonable level. So sometimes you actually can get some good cooperation from federal regulatory agencies. And I knew particularly Supervisor Euler might appreciate that good news. So that concludes my report.
Okay, thank you. Any questions? Oh,
Yeah, two first on that last one. I would encourage you to reach out to our PCCP folks. Right now, our mitigation under PCCP is 1.35 to 1. So 4 to 1 still sounds really high. And the entire area that you're discussing, even though, yes, you are impacting an existing dedicated reserve area, we've anticipated 100%, other than obviously those dedicated reserve areas, we've anticipated 100% take under the PCCP in most of the southeast corner of Placer County, most of that area. So you might want to just see if there's consistency there in terms of what we're already dealing with federal and state agencies on the PCCP, and if that 4-to-1 ratio might not come down a little bit under that. second question regarding the ongoing outreach on the possibility of a local transportation sales tax. There had been some conversation about doing another poll.
Mm-hmm.
What is the timeline on that?
The polling is, the work plan has us doing another round of polling probably in the next 2 to 3 weeks. And we anticipate coming to the board in February with those polling results, at least a preliminary level, as well as an update to the expenditure plan as a result of the outreach to date.
Okay. Who will be conducting the poll?
We have a contract with Fairbank, Maslin, I don't remember all the other names. They're known as FM3.
Okay. So it's not the same folks that we're using for the outreach currently. It's not it's a separate organization.
Oh, right, yes,
It's
yes.
been the polling.
It's a separate contract from that which we have with FSB Core Strategies.
All right.
But they have done previous polling.
Yes, they've done our last 3 polls, or last 2 polls. 3.
I just wanted to make sure that the polling and the advocacy were separate, that they're different.
Well, I want to clarify, we are doing outreach and information. We are not doing
Okay, I'm sorry.
advocacy.
Thank you. That the outreach campaign and that the polling are being conducted by different consultants.
Yes, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions for Celia? Seeing none, is there any board direction to staff? I don't see any, so there's some information items for your information, and I think we'll go ahead and adjourn. Our next regularly scheduled meeting is February 24th, and we'll be meeting at the board chambers for a while.
We're working with the county in terms of the Americans with Disabilities Act issues. I'm not sure if they will be resolved ahead of the February meeting, so we may be back here for 1 more month.
All right.
Okay.
So we are adjourned. Thank you.